Each mark on my hands tells a story few would have the courage to hear to the end. I'm Cecilia Rodriguez, 88 years old, and I've carried these scars, some visible, most not, for over 7 decades. They began in 1953, in Pineville, Georgia, a speck of a town where the air smelled of pine sap and the Chattahoochee River hummed through the night. I was 16, a girl caught between childhood and a weight no child should bear. What happened that year broke me, but it also built me. It's a story of betrayal, of a darkness that nearly swallowed my brother and me, and of the light we found in the ashes. I share it now not to reopen wounds but to show that even the deepest cuts can become part of a life woven with purpose. Pineville in 1953 was a place where time moved slow, like molasses dripping from a spoon. The town clung to the edge of a red dirt road, its heart a clapboard church with a steeple that leaned slightly left, as if bowing to the weight of our collective prayers. Cotton fields stretched beyond the horizon, their white tufts swaying under a sky that could turn from sapphire to storm in an hour. Our house, a weathered wooden structure with a tin roof, sat at the town's edge, surrounded by live oaks draped in Spanish moss. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle in spring, but by October, when this story begins, it carried the sharp tang of fallen leaves and chimney smoke. Life here was simple, governed by the rhythm of seasons and the clanging bell of the freight train that cut through twice a day. I was 16, all elbows and dreams, with my mother's chestnut hair and my father's quiet stubbornness. Mama had been the glue of our family, her laughter filling the house like sunlight. But pneumonia stole her the previous winter, leaving a void that echoed in every corner. In less than a week, our home lost the scent of her homemade lavender soap and the twang of her old guitar. Daddy, a railroad man with calloused hands and a heart too heavy for words, buried his grief in work. He'd leave for days, sometimes weeks, his absence a silent ache. That left me to raise Peter, my 7-year-old brother, whose brown eyes held questions I couldn't answer. Cecilia, why doesn't Mama come back? Peter would ask nightly, his voice small, his curls damp against his forehead. I'd brush his hair, like Mama used to, and whisper, she's a star now, Peter. One of the brightest. It was a lie I told us both, a way to stitch together the fraying edges of our world. By day, I took in washing, baked cornbread to sell at the Sunday market, and bartered eggs from our chickens for flour or sugar. At night, when Peter slept, I'd bury my face in Mama's pillow, its faint scent of her the only thing keeping me from unraveling. I was a girl playing at being a woman, and I was drowning. The train whistle sounded early that October afternoon, a low wail that cut through the muggy air. I was scrubbing a pot in the kitchen, my hands raw from lye soap, when I saw Daddy through the window. He wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him, her floral dress too bright for Pineville's muted palette, her brown hair pinned neatly under a hat. Her red lipstick framed a smile that seemed to promise something I couldn't name. Peter peeked from behind my skirt, his fingers clutching the fabric. Cecilia, Peter, come meet Gertrude, Daddy said, his voice lighter than it had been in months. She's gonna be your new mother. The words landed like a stone in a still pond, ripples spreading through me. I stood frozen in the doorway, nodding mutely. Gertrude approached, her jasmine perfume overwhelming the kitchen's familiar smell of cornbread and grease. She stroked my hair, her touch too deliberate. Finally, I'll have the daughter I've always dreamed of, she said, her voice syrupy. But her eyes, sharp, calculating, told a different story, one I was too young to read. The first weeks were a strange dream after months of nightmare. Gertrude swept into our lives with new curtains, the scent of fried chicken, and fresh daisies on the dining table. She told Peter fantastical bedtime stories, tales of pirates and talking foxes, that left him wide-eyed and giggling. Daddy smiled again, his accordion filling Saturday nights with music for the first time since Mama's death. Neighbors at church called Gertrude a saint, their whispers tinged with envy. What a blessing for those poor children, they'd say, patting my shoulder. I wanted to believe it. I watched her knead dough for Peter's favorite cornbread and thought, maybe God sent her to heal us. But there were moments, fleeting, like shadows crossing the sun, that unsettled me. Once, when Peter knocked over an antique teacup she claimed was her grandmother's, her face twisted into fury before snapping back to a tight smile. It's okay, my angel. Accidents happen, she said, but her eyes burned with something cold. I brushed it off, chalking it up to my own mistrust. Grief, I reasoned, had made me wary. Then, one humid afternoon, while helping her organize her things in Mama's old sewing room, I found a photograph tucked among her scarves. It showed a younger Gertrude, her arm around a man who wasn't Daddy, both smiling at a girl about Peter's age. I turned it over. Frank, Gertrude, and Clara, 1947. Curiosity got the better of me. Who are these people, Mrs. Gertrude? I asked, holding out the photo. Her reaction was instant, like a snake striking. She snatched the picture, her nails grazing my finger, leaving a thin cut. Never touch my things without permission, she hissed, her eyes wild with rage. This is none of your business. Understand? I nodded, my heart pounding, and fled the room. That night, at dinner, Daddy announced he'd be gone for 2 weeks on a railroad expansion north. Gertrude's hand rested on his, her smile serene. Don't worry, dear. I'll take care of the children, she said, but her eyes, glinting in the lamplight, made my stomach twist. The train left the next morning, carrying Daddy and our last shield. Peter clung to my hand as we waved from the platform, the whistle fading into the distance. When we turned, Gertrude's smile was gone, her face hard as granite. Let's go, she said, her voice clipped. We have work to do. As the door closed behind us, she yanked off her scarf, tossed her heels aside, and poured herself a glass of Daddy's whiskey. First rule, she said, her eyes narrowing. No more Mrs. Gertrude. I'm ma'am. And second, enough whimpering about your dead mother. Peter flinched, and I pulled him close, my heart sinking. The woman Daddy left to protect us was gone. In her place stood someone else entirely, a wolf who'd been waiting for the shepherd to leave the flock. The air in Pineville that October morning was heavy, the kind of damp that clung to your skin and made every breath feel like a sip of warm soup. The live oaks outside our house stood sentinel, their moss swaying like ghostly fingers in the breeze. Inside, the atmosphere was thicker still, charged with a tension that prickled my scalp. Gertrude's transformation had been swift, her mask of warmth discarded the moment Daddy's train vanished. At 16, I was too young to name the danger, but I felt it, a low hum in my bones, like the rumble of a storm too far off to see. She stood in the kitchen, whiskey glass in hand, her floral dress wrinkled now, as if the effort of pretending had exhausted its seams. Peter pressed against me, his small hand trembling in mine. Very well, Gertrude said, her voice sharp as a blade. The real rules of this house start now. She downed the liquor, her lips curling into a sneer. First, you call me ma'am. Second, I'm in charge. And third, there's work to be done, work you've been neglecting. Her eyes flicked to me, then Peter, sizing us up like livestock at the county fair. I wanted to protest, to say we'd been managing just fine, washing clothes, tending chickens, keeping the house from falling apart, but the fire in her gaze silenced me. She handed me a list scrawled on the back of an old envelope, the handwriting jagged, as if written in anger. Wash all the linens in the tub with cold water. Scrub every floorboard with a toothbrush. Polish the silver. Cook 3 meals. Tend the garden. The task stretched beyond reason, a mountain no one could climb in a day. And Peter? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. What will he do? Gertrude's smile was a crescent moon, cold and distant. Don't worry about your brother. He'll have his duties. Before I could ask more, she turned to him. Boy, go fetch water from the well. 2 buckets. Now. Peter's eyes widened, but he nodded, his small frame already moving toward the door. The well was half a mile away, and the buckets were nearly as tall as he was. I started to follow, but Gertrude's hand shot out, gripping my arm. You stay. Start on that list, or you'll both regret it. The first day was a blur of labor. I scrubbed sheets until my knuckles bled, the cold water turning my fingers numb. The floorboards drank my sweat as I crawled across them, toothbrush in hand, while the sun climbed higher, baking the house. Gertrude lounged on the porch, a magazine in one hand, a glass of sweet tea in the other, her eyes tracking us like a hawk. Through the window, I saw Peter stumble back from the well, water sloshing over his shoes, his thin legs buckling under the weight. Each time he paused, Gertrude clapped sharply from her chair. "Faster, boy. The cistern won't fill itself." I ran outside, my hands still dripping. "He's too small to carry that much. He'll hurt himself." The words burst out before I could stop them. Gertrude's head snapped toward me, and in an instant, her palm cracked across my cheek. The sting was sharp, but it was the shock that made me stagger, the realization that this woman could hurt us, would hurt us, without hesitation. "Get back inside and finish your work," she hissed. "Or I'll tell your father how rebellious you've been when he called last night." It was a lie. The nearest telephone was in town, miles away, and Daddy never called. But the threat landed like a stone in my gut. Daddy was happy again, his smile a fragile thing I couldn't bear to break. I swallowed my anger and returned to the kitchen, my cheek burning, my mind racing. Peter's eyes followed me from the yard, wide with fear, and I mouthed, "It's okay," though it wasn't. Meals became another torment. Gertrude ate first, alone, taking the best portions of the cornbread and greens I'd cooked. Peter and I shared what remained, often just scraps, never enough to fill the hollow ache in our bellies. More than once, I slipped half my portion onto his plate when Gertrude wasn't looking, his hungry stare cutting deeper than my own hunger. At night, when the house fell silent, Peter would slip into my room, his small body shivering despite the warmth. "There's noises in my room, Cece," he'd whisper, but we both knew it wasn't the creaking boards he feared. It was her. I'd hold him close, humming Mama's songs, "Oh Susanna, Amazing Grace," until his breathing slowed. In those moments, I felt the weight of my promise to protect him, a vow I'd made to Mama's memory the day she died. But how? Gertrude was a force, a storm we couldn't outrun. Each day, her demands grew harsher. Peter was sent to chop wood with an axe too heavy for his arms, to clean the chicken coop until his eyes watered from the dust, to climb the tallest pippin tree for fruit. "He'll fall," I begged one afternoon, watching him teeter on a thin branch. Gertrude didn't look up from her magazine. "Then he'll learn to be careful." The cruelty wasn't just in the tasks but in the way she wielded them, her words sharp as thorns. "You're not the lady of the house anymore," she'd sneer at me, or, to Peter, "Stop sniveling like a baby." Her voice carried a venom that made my skin crawl, as if our existence offended her. Yet there were moments when I caught her staring at Peter, her expression softening, almost wistful, before hardening again. It confused me, that flicker of something human, but I didn't trust it. One evening, as I washed dishes, I overheard her muttering to herself, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Clara would have been his age," she said, her voice low, almost broken. I froze, the name from the photograph echoing in my mind. Who was Clara? And why did her name make Gertrude's hands tremble? I didn't dare ask, but the question lodged in my chest, a puzzle piece I couldn't yet place. By the 5th day, I was bone-tired, my body aching from tasks that never ended. Peter's face was pale, his eyes shadowed, his laughter a memory. That afternoon, Gertrude announced she'd be gone for a few hours, visiting a cousin in the next town. The moment the truck's rumble faded down the dirt road, I grabbed Peter's hand. "Come on," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's play." We ran to the creek behind the neighbor's property, a hidden ribbon of water where willows dipped their branches like curtains. The air was cooler there, scented with wet earth and wild mint. We waded in, the cold biting our ankles, and skipped stones across the surface, laughing when they sank after one bounce. Peter's giggle, bright and unguarded, was a balm to my heart. We even tried fishing with a stick and string, giggling when a minnow stole the bait. For those hours, we were children again, free from the weight of Gertrude's shadow. But freedom came at a cost. We lost track of time, the sun dipping low before we realized. We raced home, breathless, only to find Gertrude on the porch, arms crossed, her face a mask of fury. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice low, dangerous. I tried to explain, but she cut me off. I didn't ask what you did. I asked where. Peter's voice trembled as he answered, the creek, ma'am. Her silence was worse than shouting, her eyes boring into us like needles. She pointed inside. Cecilia, go make dinner. Peter, come with me to the shed. We need to talk about obedience. My stomach dropped. Can I come too? I asked, gripping Peter's hand. No, she snapped. This is between me and your brother. Peter's eyes begged me to stay, but I let go, my heart screaming as they walked to the shed. The door closed with a thud, and I stood in the kitchen, helpless, the knife in my hand trembling as I chopped carrots, every sound from outside a dagger in my chest. The kitchen was dim, the only light a flickering oil lamp casting shadows that danced like specters on the walls. Outside, the Pineville night was alive with the chirp of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl, but inside, my world had narrowed to the thud of the shed door closing behind Peter and Gertrude. My hand shook as I chopped carrots, the knife slipping, nicking my thumb. Blood welled, a bright bead against my skin, but I barely felt it. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves, made my heart lurch, straining for sounds from the shed. What was she doing to him? The question gnawed at me, a beast I couldn't cage. I tried to focus on the soup simmering on the wood stove, its steam carrying the faint scent of onions and thyme, but my eyes kept darting to the window. The shed was a dark silhouette against the twilight, its single window opaque. For over half an hour, there was nothing, no cries, no shouts, just an oppressive silence that pressed against my chest. When the door finally opened, Peter emerged first, his small figure rigid, arms held stiffly at his sides. Gertrude followed, tucking something into her apron pocket with a quick, furtive motion. I strained to see what it was, but the darkness swallowed the details. At dinner, Peter sat hunched, his fork hovering over his plate, untouched. Each time Gertrude moved, a clink of her glass, a scrape of her chair, he flinched, his eyes fixed on the table. I tried to catch his gaze, to silently ask what had happened, but he wouldn't look at me. Gertrude ate with exaggerated calm, her red lipstick smudged, her smile a thin veneer. Eat, boy, she said, her voice deceptively soft. You'll need your strength for tomorrow. Peter nodded, pushing a bean around his plate, and my stomach twisted. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Later, when Gertrude's bedroom door clicked shut, I waited, counting the minutes until the house settled into silence. The clock on the mantel ticked past 11, each second a hammer on my nerves. I crept to Peter's room, the floorboards cold against my bare feet, and knocked softly. No answer. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning, and found him lying face down on his bed, still in his day clothes. Moonlight spilled through the small window, painting his curls silver. Peter, I whispered, touching his shoulder. He stifled a groan, his body tensing under my hand. What did she do? My voice was barely audible, fear and fury tangling in my throat. Slowly, with movements that seemed to pain him, Peter lifted his shirt. Even in the dim light, I saw them, red welts crisscrossing his back, swollen but not bleeding, the marks of a switch. My breath caught, rage surging so fiercely I tasted blood where I bit my lip to keep from screaming. In 1953, a switching wasn't uncommon in rural Georgia. Parents used it to discipline, neighbors nodded approval, but this was different. This was cruelty, deliberate and savored, etched into my brother's fragile skin. She said it's our secret, Peter murmured, tears silent but shining on his cheeks. Said if I tell anyone, especially you or Daddy, she'll send me to a boarding school where they hit harder. His voice broke, and I pulled him into my arms, careful not to press his wounds. His small body shook against mine, and I felt something inside me snap, a piece of the girl I'd been, replaced by a resolve as hard as iron. Gertrude would never touch him again. I'd make sure of it, even if it meant facing the demon in the floral dress. That night, as Peter slept fitfully in my arms, I made a silent vow. No more pleading, no more hoping for mercy. I'd protect him, whatever it took. By dawn, as the first rooster crowed and the sky blushed pink, I had a plan, what I called the protection system. It wasn't much, just a desperate strategy born of necessity, but it was all I had. I slipped out of bed before the sun rose, the house still cloaked in shadow, and began mapping it out in my mind. The system was simple but meticulous. First, Peter and I would never be separated. "Always stay where I can see you," I told him as we sat on his bed, the morning light filtering through the window. "If you can't see me, stay where you can hear me." We devised a code. One short whistle meant she's coming, be careful. Two quick whistles meant hide, one long whistle meant all clear. We practiced until Peter's lips could shape the sounds perfectly, his eyes bright with a trust that both strengthened and terrified me. Second, I'd take on the heaviest chores before Gertrude woke, sparing Peter her impossible demands. I'd rise at 4:30 a.m., fill the cistern, feed the chickens, start breakfast, anything to keep her from sending him to the well or the woodpile. Third, we'd avoid being alone with her. "If she tells you to go somewhere," I instructed, "say you need the bathroom and find me first." Peter nodded, his small hand gripping mine, and I prayed I could be the shield he needed. That morning, I moved like a ghost through the house, finishing half the cistern and setting coffee to boil before Gertrude stirred. When she shuffled into the kitchen, her eyes puffy from liquor and sleep, she froze, surprised to see the table laid with biscuits and jam. "What's this?" she asked, suspicion lacing her voice. "I thought you'd like to start the day with everything in order, ma'am," I said, keeping my eyes down, my tone submissive. She studied me, searching for defiance, then shrugged and sat, sipping her coffee. "Where's your brother?" she asked, her fork pausing midair. "He fed the chickens and's cleaning the pig pen," I lied smoothly, knowing Peter was tucked in the attic with a slice of bread I'd hidden. Her cold smile returned. "I see you've finally learned how things work." I nodded, swallowing the bile in my throat, and turned to scrub the stove, my hand steady but my heart racing. The system was working, for now. Each day, I refined it, learning Gertrude's patterns. Mornings after she drank heavily, her temper was a hair trigger, her face swollen, her patience thin. On those days, I'd stage distractions, spilling flour to clean while Peter slipped outside, or mentioning a rat in the pantry, knowing her fear of rodents would keep her away. I hid food for us, apples tucked in my apron, cornbread wrapped in cloth, because hunger made us vulnerable. At night, when Gertrude slept, Peter and I whispered plans, his small voice clinging to hope. "Will Daddy be back soon?" he'd ask. For more days, I'd say, praying it was true. But survival wasn't just about chores or food. It was about keeping Peter's spirit alive. Gertrude had forbidden school, claiming work teaches more than books, so I taught him in secret. By candlelight, we used Mama's recipe notebook to practice reading, each ingredient a lesson. For math, we counted beans I'd pocketed from cooking. For science, we studied the weeds in the yard, naming their leaves. "You're smart, Peter," I'd whisper. "You'll go back to school one day." His smile, faint but real, was worth every risk. Yet Gertrude's shadow loomed. One afternoon, she caught me slipping Peter a biscuit I'd saved. "Stealing food," she roared, her face twisting. "It's not stealing," I said, forcing calm. "I saved it for him. He's hungry." Her slap was swift, splitting my lip, the taste of blood sharp. "You think you're clever?" she spat, her breath hot. "You think I don't see you scheming to make me the villain?" Her words confused me, villain to whom, but I held my ground, meeting her gaze until she stormed out, muttering about needing air. That night, as I pressed a cold cloth to my swollen lip, I found her diary under the porch rocking chair, forgotten in her haste. My hands trembled as I opened it, guilt warring with desperation. The early pages were mundane, notes about city life, dresses, men. But then I found her truth. Frank, her husband, had left her, taking their daughter, Clara. Gertrude's pain bled through the ink, her failed attempts to find Clara, her rage at being abandoned. I closed the book, my heart heavy. She was a monster, but a broken one. And in that knowledge, I saw a weapon, not compassion, but strategy. If I could reach the woman beneath the cruelty, maybe I could protect us until Daddy returned. The Pineville dawn broke soft, painting the sky in hues of peach and gold, but inside our house, the air was taut, a bowstring ready to snap. The live oaks outside whispered with a breeze that carried the scent of damp earth and pine, a reminder of a world beyond Gertrude's reach. At 16, I was learning to navigate her like a sailor reading a storm, watching for the twitch of her brow, the tap of her nails, signs of the fury that could erupt without warning. My protection system, fragile but holding, was all that stood between Peter and her wrath. Each morning, I rose before the rooster's crow, my body aching but my mind sharp, determined to outwit the woman who'd turned our home into a battlefield. I'd begun to weave small, calculated gestures into the system, using what I'd learned from Gertrude's diary. Not out of kindness, but survival. That morning, I placed a single wild daisy in a cracked teacup on the breakfast table, its delicate petals a stark contrast to the chipped wood. When Gertrude noticed, her eyes narrowed. "What's this?" she asked, her voice edged with suspicion. "Mama used to say a flower brightens any room," I said softly, keeping my gaze on the floor. "Thought it might bring good memories, ma'am." For a fleeting moment, her face softened, a crack in her armor. She didn't thank me, but she moved the daisy to a glass of water, her fingers lingering on the stem. It was a small victory, a moment of truce in our silent war. The system's core was keeping Peter safe. I woke at 4 a.m., slipping through the house like a shadow to tackle the heaviest chores, hauling water, scrubbing linens, feeding the chickens, before Gertrude could assign them to him. I'd hide him in the attic or behind the woodshed, giving him bread or an apple I'd squirreled away. During the day, I kept him in my sight, our whistle code a lifeline. One short whistle when Gertrude approached, two quick ones if he needed to hide. He'd scurry to the crawlspace under the porch or the thicket beyond the garden, his small frame vanishing like a rabbit. "You're fast," I'd whisper when he returned, ruffling his curls, and he'd grin, a spark of pride in his eyes. I also began cultivating a secret garden behind the woodshed, where the shade of a gnarled oak hid it from view. I planted lettuce and radishes, their tender shoots a promise of extra food for Peter, who grew thinner each day. I traded small favors with Lila, the washerwoman's daughter who passed by twice a week, mending her doll's dress for an egg, braiding her hair for a wedge of cheese. These scraps kept us from starving, a quiet rebellion against Gertrude's control. But rebellion came with risks. Gertrude's moods were a minefield. On good days, she'd hum old hymns, her voice surprisingly sweet, and let us eat a full plate. On bad ones, when her eyes were red from liquor and her hands twitched, she'd lash out. One afternoon, she caught me teaching Peter to read using Mama's recipe book. "What's this nonsense?" she snapped, snatching the book. "Work's worth more than words." I bit back my retort, knowing defiance would cost us. That night, I hid the book under my mattress, vowing to keep Peter's mind alive, even if it meant whispering lessons in the dark. I'd also learned to distract her, tapping into the pain her diary revealed. When she seemed ready to snap, I'd ask about her cornbread recipe, the one she'd bragged about making in the city. "Could you teach me, ma'am?" I'd say, feigning eagerness. She'd pause, her anger derailed, and launch into a lecture about cornmeal ratios, her voice softening as she spoke of her past. Or I'd mention, casually, how Peter might like an older sister someday, watching her eyes flicker with the ghost of Clara. These moments didn't make her kind, but they bought us time, space to breathe. Yet the strain was wearing me down. My hands were raw, my back ached, and sleep was a luxury stolen in fragments. Peter's laughter, once a daily song, was now rare, his eyes shadowed with a wariness no child should know. At night, when he crept into my bed, his questions cut deeper. "Why does she hate us, Cece?" he'd whisper, his voice small against the chorus of crickets outside. "It's not us," I'd say, stroking his hair. "It's something broken in her." I believed it, but it didn't ease the fear that clung to us like damp clothes. One evening, as I swept the porch, I overheard Gertrude on the phone in town. She'd driven there to run errands, a rare absence we cherished. Her voice, muffled through the open window, was low but urgent. "I can't keep this up, Frank," she said, her tone raw. "You took her, and now I'm stuck here, playing mother to his brats." A pause, then, "No, I won't let them ruin this. Joseph's my chance. My heart raced. Frank, Clara's father. She was talking about Daddy, about us. I crept closer, but she hung up, her footsteps heavy as she returned. I ducked behind the rain barrel, my mind spinning. She wasn't just cruel, she was desperate, clinging to Daddy like a lifeline. And we were in her way. The next day, I tested a new tactic. While serving breakfast, I hummed one of Mama's hymns, Blessed Assurance, loud enough for Gertrude to hear. She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, her eyes distant. My mama sang that, she said, almost to herself. I seized the moment. It's Peter's favorite, ma'am. He says it makes him feel safe. A lie, but it worked. She nodded, her expression softening, and didn't snap when Peter spilled his milk. It was a small crack, but I clung to it, weaving faith into our survival, a thread of hope in the darkness. But hope was fragile. That afternoon, Gertrude found a carrot I'd hidden for Peter in my apron pocket. Hoarding now, she roared, her face inches from mine. You think you're smarter than me? She grabbed my wrist, twisting until I gasped, the carrot falling to the floor. Peter ran in, his eyes wide. Stop it, he shouted, his voice trembling but fierce. To my shock, Gertrude released me, her gaze flickering to Peter, then away. Get out of my sight, both of you, she muttered, storming to the porch. Peter's defiance, so like Daddy's, had shaken her. But it also scared me. We were pushing her, and I didn't know how much further she'd bend before she broke. That night, as thunder rumbled in the distance, I lay awake, Peter curled beside me. The air was thick with the promise of a storm, the kind that could tear roofs from houses or lives from families. I traced the scars on my hands, calluses from work, a faint line from her nail, and felt a resolve harden within me. We were surviving, but survival wasn't enough. I needed to protect Peter's heart, his future, not just his body. And I needed to understand Gertrude, not to forgive, but to outmaneuver her. I thought of her diary, her confession about Clara's loss, and wondered if I could reach that broken woman. Not for her sake, but for ours. If I could keep her human, keep her from seeing us as enemies, we might make it until Daddy returned. 3 days left. 3 days to hold the line. As lightning flashed, illuminating Peter's sleeping face, I whispered a prayer, one Mama taught me, Lord, make me a light in the dark. I didn't know if God was listening, but I knew I had to be that light for Peter, no matter what came next. The Pineville sky hung low, gray clouds churning like a troubled sea, promising a storm that would shake the earth. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and wet leaves, the kind of day that made the hairs on your arms stand up, warning of trouble. Inside our house, the tension was sharper, a blade honed by days of surviving Gertrude's cruelty. At 16, I was learning to walk a tightrope, balancing defiance with submission, hope with fear. My protection system was a fragile web, holding Peter and me together, but each day tested its strength. As the storm brewed outside, I felt it mirrored within me, a gathering force I couldn't yet name. I woke before dawn, as always, slipping through the house to beat Gertrude's demands. The floorboards were cool under my feet, the silence broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. I filled the cistern, swept the porch, and started a pot of grits, my hands moving on instinct while my mind churned. Peter was still in the attic, hidden with a crust of cornbread I'd saved. Our whistle code had become second nature, his small frame darting to safety at the first signal. But I knew we couldn't outrun Gertrude forever. Her patience, thin as it was fraying, and Peter's defiance yesterday, his brave shout to stop her, had left a mark. I saw it in her eyes, a flicker of something dangerous, like a snake coiling to strike. Breakfast was a quiet affair, the clink of spoons against bowls drowned by the wind rattling the windows. Gertrude sat at the table, her hair less precise today, strands escaping her bun like cracks in her facade. I'd placed another daisy on the table, a calculated gesture, and she hadn't tossed it away. Instead, she stared at it, her fingers tracing the petals absently. "You're full of tricks, aren't you?" she said, her voice low, almost amused. I kept my eyes on my plate. Just trying to make things nice, ma'am. She snorted but didn't press, and I exhaled, a small victory. Peter ate quickly, his eyes darting to me for reassurance. I nodded slightly, signaling stay close. The system relied on keeping him near, but Gertrude's gaze lingered on him, her expression unreadable. "Boy, you'll clean the shed today," she said abruptly. "Tools need organizing." My heart sank. The shed was her domain, a place of punishment, and I couldn't follow. "I can help," I said, keeping my tone light. "It'll go faster." Her eyes narrowed. "No. You'll scrub the kitchen floor." Again. Peter's hand tightened on his spoon, but he nodded, and I forced a smile, whistling one short note as he left the table, "Be careful." As I scrubbed the floor, my knees aching against the wood, I strained to hear any sound from the shed. The wind howled, swallowing most noises, but I caught the faint clatter of metal, tools, I hoped. I worked faster, splashing water to mask my anxiety, my mind racing for a way to check on him. Gertrude sat on the porch, her rocking chair creaking, a magazine open but unread. Her eyes flicked toward the shed, then back to me through the window, a silent warning. I hummed "Blessed Assurance" softly, hoping to distract her, but she didn't react, her face a mask of calculation. An hour later, Peter returned, his shirt smudged with dirt, his face pale but unmarked. Relief flooded me, but his eyes avoided mine, and he moved stiffly, as if guarding a secret. "All done, ma'am," he said, his voice flat. Gertrude nodded, dismissing him with a wave. I waited until she stepped inside, then pulled him to the garden, out of earshot. "What happened?" I whispered, checking his arms, his back. No new marks, but his hands trembled. "She just watched me," he said, his voice small. "Said I'd better not tell Daddy I'm lazy. Said he'd be ashamed." My jaw clenched. She was planting lies, poisoning the one bond we had left. "He'd never believe her," I said fiercely. "You're his pride." Peter nodded, but doubt lingered in his eyes, a wound deeper than any switch could leave. That afternoon, I doubled my efforts to keep Gertrude's temper at bay. I asked her to show me how to mend a seam, knowing she prided herself on her needlework. She hesitated, then spent an hour demonstrating, her voice softening as she spoke of learning from her own mother. I nodded, feigning interest, while slipping Peter an extra biscuit under the table. These moments of distraction were our lifeline, but they were exhausting, like dancing with a viper. Each word, each gesture, had to be perfect, or the fangs would come out. By evening, the storm was closer, lightning flickering on the horizon like a warning. Gertrude's mood darkened with the sky. She drank more than usual, her glass refilled twice, her movements unsteady. At dinner, she barely spoke, her eyes fixed on some distant point. Peter and I ate in silence, the air heavy with unspoken dread. "Go to bed," she snapped suddenly, slamming her glass down. We obeyed, retreating to my room, where Peter curled against me, his breathing uneven. "2 more days," I whispered, stroking his hair. "Daddy's almost home." But the words felt hollow, the storm outside mirroring the one brewing within our walls. That night, I lay awake, the wind howling through the oaks, the house groaning under its force. Peter slept fitfully, his small body warm against mine. I thought of Gertrude's diary, her pain over Clara, and wondered if I could use it more boldly. Could I appeal to her loss, make her see Peter not as a threat but as a child, like her daughter? The idea felt reckless, but we were running out of time. Her desperation, her talk of Daddy as her chance, made her unpredictable. I needed to shift the game, to make her hesitate before she struck. At 3 a.m., unable to sleep, I crept to the kitchen for water. The house was dark, but a faint glow came from the living room. Gertrude sat in the armchair, a candle burning, her diary open in her lap. She didn't notice me, her face wet with tears, her lips moving silently as she read. I froze, my heart pounding. This was the woman who'd hurt us, yet here she was, raw and broken, mourning a daughter she'd lost. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity, but I pushed it down. Pity wouldn't protect us. Knowledge would. I slipped back to bed, my mind racing. Tomorrow, I'd try something new, a riskier move. I'd mention Clara, not directly, but enough to stir her heart. Maybe a story about Peter wanting a sister, or a question about her past. If I could make her see us as children, not enemies, we might survive until Daddy's return. But as thunder shook the house, a deeper fear gnawed at me. The storm was coming, and not just from the sky. Gertrude's control was slipping, and I didn't know what she'd do when it broke. I held Peter closer, whispering Mama's prayer into the dark, Lord, make me a light. I needed that light now, more than ever, to guide us through the gathering dark. The storm hit Pineville like a fist, transforming the night into a chaos of wind and rain that battered the house. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the live oaks outside in stark, skeletal flashes, their moss whipping like tattered flags. The air smelled of wet earth and electricity, a primal scent that set my nerves on edge. Inside, the house creaked under the onslaught, the tin roof drumming with rain, but the real tempest was within our walls. Gertrude's mood had darkened with the weather, her eyes sharp and restless, her hands unsteady from too much whiskey. At 16, I felt the weight of my protection system straining, each moment a test of how far I could push before it snapped. I woke before dawn, the storm's roar drowning out the rooster's crow. Peter slept beside me, his small body curled tight, his face pale even in sleep. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet cold on the floorboards, and began the morning's work, filling the kettle, sweeping the kitchen, hiding a biscuit for Peter in my apron. The system demanded I stay ahead of Gertrude, but today felt different, the air charged with a danger I couldn't name. Daddy was due back tomorrow, and I clung to that hope like a lifeline, but surviving this day felt like crossing a crumbling bridge. Breakfast was tense, the clatter of dishes lost in the storm's din. Gertrude sat at the table, her hair loose, her dress rumpled, a glass of liquor already in hand despite the early hour. I'd placed a sprig of lavender on the table, another calculated gesture, but she ignored it, her gaze fixed on the window where rain lashed the glass. Peter ate silently, his eyes darting to me, waiting for my signal. I gave a slight nod, stay close and he relaxed fractionally, though his hands shook as he lifted his spoon. Boy, you'll stack firewood today, Gertrude said abruptly, her voice slurred but sharp. The pile's a mess, and we'll need it dry for your father's return. My stomach twisted. The firewood was under a tarp by the shed, exposed to the storm's fury. Peter was too small to handle the heavy logs, and the slick ground was a hazard. I can do it, ma'am, I said quickly. Peter can help me in the kitchen. Her head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing. You'll do as I say, girl. The floors need scrubbing again. Peter's face paled, but he nodded, and I whistled one short note as he left, be careful. As I scrubbed the kitchen floor, the storm's howl masked my fear, but my eyes kept darting to the window. Peter struggled outside, his small figure bent against the wind, logs slipping from his arms. Gertrude watched from the porch, her shawl flapping, her expression unreadable. I hummed Amazing Grace, hoping to draw her attention, but she didn't move, her focus locked on Peter. My heart pounded, every instinct screaming to run to him, but I knew she'd punish us both if I disobeyed. An hour later, Peter returned, soaked and shivering, his hands scraped from the rough wood. All done, ma'am, he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. Gertrude nodded, dismissing him, and I pulled him to the pantry under the guise of fetching flour. You okay? I whispered, checking his hands, his face. He nodded, but his eyes were dull, exhaustion carving lines no 7-year-old should bear. She kept staring, he said softly. Like she was waiting for me to fall. I hugged him, my anger a hot coal in my chest. You did good, I said. Just one more day. I doubled my efforts to keep Gertrude distracted. At noon, I asked her to show me how to make her cornbread, knowing it was a point of pride. She hesitated, then launched into a lecture, her voice softening as she described her mother's kitchen in Savannah. I nodded, slipping Peter an apple while she talked, my heart racing but my face calm. These moments were our shield, but they were fragile, like glass underfoot. By evening, the storm intensified, lightning cracking so close the house shook. Gertrude's mood plummeted, her glass refilled too often, her words slurring into venom. At dinner, she barely ate, her eyes flicking between us. "You think you're clever," she muttered, pointing at me. "Hiding food, whispering secrets. I see it all." Peter froze, his fork clattering to his plate. I forced a smile. "Just trying to help, ma'am." She leaned forward, her breath sour. "You can't fool me, girl. I know what you're doing." My pulse raced, but I held her gaze, praying she'd back down. She didn't. After dinner, she ordered Peter to clean the shed again, claiming he'd missed spots. "It's pouring," I protested, my voice shaking. "He'll get sick." Her slap was swift, stinging my cheek. "Don't talk back," she hissed. Peter's eyes widened, but he obeyed, trudging into the rain. I stood in the doorway, helpless, the storm swallowing his small figure. Gertrude watched me, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Finish the dishes," she said, and I complied, my hands trembling, every crash of thunder a reminder of Peter's vulnerability. When he returned, drenched and coughing, I knew something was wrong. His face was flushed, his eyes glassy. I waited until Gertrude retired, then slipped into his room. "Peter," I whispered, touching his forehead. He was burning, his skin scalding under my hand. "I feel funny, Cece," he murmured, his voice weak. "Everything hurts." Panic gripped me. In 1953, a fever in rural Georgia was no small thing. Without antibiotics, without a doctor nearby, it could turn deadly fast. I prepared Mama's remedy, orange leaf tea with honey, cold compresses, but the fever climbed, Peter's breathing growing ragged. By 10 p.m., he was delirious, calling for Mama, his small body trembling. Home remedies weren't enough. I needed help. Swallowing my fear, I approached Gertrude, who lounged in the armchair, a glass in hand. "Ma'am," I said, my voice steady despite my terror, "Peter's sick. Really sick. We need a doctor." She sighed, annoyed. "It's just a fever. Give him tea and stop fussing." I persisted, describing his symptoms, and something in my tone made her pause. She followed me to Peter's room, her steps unsteady. Seeing him, red-faced, shivering, eyes half open, her expression shifted, a flicker of concern breaking through her haze. "How long's he been like this?" she demanded. "Since this afternoon, but it's worse now," I said, wringing my hands. She touched his forehead, frowning. "Your father'd have my head if anything happened to him," she muttered, then straightened. "No doctor in this storm. We'll manage till dawn." Then it happened, Peter's body arched, a sharp moan escaping as his eyes rolled back. "A seizure. Do something." I screamed, forgetting all caution. To my shock, Gertrude sprang into action, her drunken haze gone. "Take off his covers," she ordered, rolling up her sleeves. "We need to cool him down. Get cold water, towels, and the alcohol from the pantry." I obeyed, stunned by her sudden competence. She worked with precision, applying compresses to Peter's neck and wrists, mixing alcohol with water to sponge his skin. "My mother was a midwife," she said, unprompted. "I've seen fevers like this." For hours, we worked side by side, the storm raging outside, our truce born of necessity. Gertrude prepared an herbal infusion from her suitcase, her hand steady as she spooned it into Peter's mouth. "Clara had fevers like this," she said softly, her voice breaking. "My daughter nearly lost her once." I didn't respond, too focused on Peter, but her words hung heavy, a glimpse into the woman behind the cruelty. As thunder shook the house, I saw tears on her cheeks, illuminated by a flash of lightning. "I don't know how to be a mother anymore," she whispered, almost inaudible. "When Frank took her, something died in me." By 5 a.m., Peter's fever broke, his breathing steadying, color returning to his face. Gertrude stood, exhausted. "He'll be fine," she said, her voice flat. As the storm eased, the first train whistle sounded, signaling Daddy's return. Go rest, she told me, her tone softer than I'd ever heard. I'll handle breakfast. I sat by Peter, stroking his hair, relief mingling with confusion. The night had changed something, but what? Gertrude's humanity had surfaced, but the scars she'd left remained. As dawn broke, I whispered to Peter, we made it. But the storm wasn't over, just paused, waiting for the next strike. The dawn after the storm broke over Pineville in a hush, the sky bruised but calm, streaked with pink and gold. The live oaks stood weary, their moss dripping, the ground sodden with puddles that mirrored the fading clouds. The air carried a clean, earthy scent, as if the world had been washed anew, but inside our house, the weight of the night lingered. Peter slept peacefully, his fever gone, his small chest rising and falling under the quilt. I sat beside him, my hand resting on his curls, exhaustion battling relief. At 16, I'd seen him through the worst night of our lives, but the memory of Gertrude's hands, cruel one day, life-saving the next, unsettled me. The protection system had held, but at what cost? Daddy's train was due soon, and I didn't know what his return would mean for the fragile truce we'd forged. I slipped to the kitchen, where Gertrude was already at work, her movements brisk but quiet. The scent of coffee and frying bacon filled the air, a stark contrast to the chaos of the night before. Her floral dress was pressed, her hair pinned neatly, as if she'd erased the woman who'd wept over Peter's bedside. She glanced at me, her eyes guarded but lacking their usual ice. "He's still sleeping?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded. "He's better." "Thank you, ma'am." The words felt foreign, gratitude tangled with distrust. She paused, then turned back to the stove, her silence louder than any reply. The train whistle sounded at 7 a.m., sharp and clear, slicing through the morning stillness. From the porch, I watched Daddy step off, his leather suitcase worn but familiar, his face breaking into a smile at the sight of the house. My throat tightened, tears pricking my eyes. He didn't know, couldn't know, the hell we'd endured. Gertrude met him at the station, her demeanor polished, the perfect wife. They embraced, her laugh light as she took his suitcase, and I felt a pang of betrayal, as if her performance mocked our suffering. "Where are the children?" I heard him ask as they approached, his voice warm but tired. "Peter's resting," Gertrude said smoothly, her hand on his arm. "He had a fever last night, but he's much better now. Cecilia's with him." No lie, but a careful omission, leaving out the punishments, the fear, the switch marks on Peter's back. I stood in the doorway, my hands twisting in my apron, torn between running to Daddy and spilling everything or protecting the fragile peace he'd found. His happiness was a rare light, and I couldn't bear to snuff it out, not yet. He entered Peter's room, kneeling beside the bed, his rough hands gentle as he studied his son's face. "How is he really?" he asked me, his voice low, worry etching lines around his eyes. "It was bad," I said honestly, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "The fever spiked, and he had a seizure. But we got him through." Daddy's face paled, his hand tightening on the bed frame. "Why didn't you fetch Dr. Mendez?" Gertrude, standing in the doorway, answered before I could. "The storm was too fierce, Joseph. The roads were impassable. But we cared for him all night." She paused, then added, "Cecilia was tireless." Her praise caught me off guard, a strange note in the symphony of her deceit. Our eyes met, and for a moment, something passed between us, not trust, but an acknowledgement of the night we'd shared, united by Peter's survival. Daddy nodded, his relief palpable, and kissed Peter's forehead. "Thank God," he murmured, and I swallowed the truth, letting it sink like a stone in my gut. The days that followed were a strange dance, a new normal laced with unease. Daddy's presence softened the house, his laughter a balm after weeks of silence. He played his accordion on the porch, the notes drifting over the cotton fields, and neighbors stopped by, drawn to the music. Gertrude was careful, her cruelty restrained, though her eyes still carried a glint of calculation. The physical punishment stopped, and Peter returned to school, Daddy insisting he resume lessons. I was allowed to work 3 afternoons a week at Mr. Wen's grocery store, a reprieve that brought pocket money and distance from Gertrude's shadow. but the scars remained. Peter flinched at sudden movements, his laughter quieter, his trust bruised. At night, he still crept into my bed, whispering, "Is she gonna hurt us again?" I'd hold him, humming Mama's songs, and promise, "Not while I'm here." I kept the protection system alive, subtle now, whistles when Gertrude's temper flared, hidden food in case meals grew scarce again. I watched her closely, noting the way she softened around Daddy, her laughter almost genuine, but never forgot the switch, the slaps, the coldness in her eyes. One afternoon at the grocery store, stacking cans of peaches, I met Sophie, the pastor's daughter, newly returned from seminary in Atlanta. She was 7 years older, her warm brown eyes familiar from childhood games. "Cecilia Rodriguez, look at you, all grown," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug. We talked for an hour, her kindness loosening the knot in my chest. When she asked about Gertrude, her voice low, I hesitated. Daddy's happiness, Peter's fragility, my own fear of shattering our fragile peace held me back. Sophie squeezed my hand. "Church walls keep secrets safe," she said. "I'll be in the sacristy tomorrow after Mass if you need to talk." That night, I lay awake, Peter's soft snores beside me, the oak outside tapping the window like a restless spirit. Sophie's offer was a lifeline, but speaking the truth felt like betraying Daddy, risking the stability we'd clawed back. Yet the weight of silence was crushing, each unspoken word a stone on my chest. I thought of Gertrude's tears, her confession about Clara, and wondered if understanding her pain could change anything. She wasn't a monster, not entirely, just a woman broken by loss, her hurt spilling onto us. But understanding didn't erase the welts on Peter's back or the fear in his eyes. The next morning, after Mass, I slipped into the sacristy, the air cool and heavy with the scent of wax and old wood. Sophie sat on a pew, her smile gentle. "You look like you're carrying the world," she said. The dam broke, and I told her everything, the impossible chores, the switch, the protection system, the night of the fever. I spoke of Gertrude's diary, her loss of Clara, the fleeting humanity I'd glimpsed. Sophie listened, her face steady, her hand warm on mine. When I finished, she said, "What you did for Peter is extraordinary, Cecilia. Few could have been so strong." I shook my head, tears burning. "I don't feel strong. I don't know what to do now." "Tell Daddy?" "He's happy, Sophie. I can't take that from him." She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "Secrets like these don't stay buried forever. Trust your heart, but know you're not alone. The church, the community, we're here." Her words were a seed, planted deep, though I didn't yet know how they'd grow. As I walked home, the sun warm on my face, the cotton fields swaying, I felt lighter, as if sharing the truth had loosened a knot. Daddy was due back from a short trip tomorrow, and I resolved to watch, to wait. Gertrude's humanity was a crack I could widen, but her cruelty was a shadow I couldn't ignore. I whispered Mama's prayer, "Lord, make me a light," and felt it take root, a promise to protect Peter, to find a way forward, no matter what lay ahead. The Pinedale sun hung high, casting long shadows across the red dirt road, the air thick with the scent of blooming honeysuckle and drying mud. The storm's aftermath left the town softer, the cotton fields glistening, the live oaks standing prouder, as if cleansed. But in our house, the calm was uneasy, a held breath waiting to break. Daddy's return had brought a fragile normalcy, his presence a shield that dulled Gertrude's edges, but I knew better than to trust it. At 16, I carried the protection system like a second skin, its rules, watch, hide, distract, etched into my every move. Peter's smile was returning, but his eyes still held a wariness, a scar no one could see. The night of the fever had changed something, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that our story with Gertrude was far from over. I moved through the days with cautious precision, balancing work at Mr. Wen's grocery store with chores at home. The store was a haven, its shelves of canned goods and sacks of flour a world away from Gertrude's gaze. Peter was back at school, his small frame hunched over books again, and Daddy's laughter filled the evenings, his accordion weaving melodies that drew neighbors to our porch. Gertrude played her part well, doting wife, attentive stepmother, her floral dresses pristine, her smile practiced. But I saw the cracks, The way her hands tightened when Peter spoke too loudly, the glint in her eyes when Daddy wasn't looking. She hadn't struck us since the fever, but her control was a leash, and I didn't know how long it would hold. Sophie's words in the sacristy echoed in my mind, secrets don't stay buried forever. I wanted to tell Daddy, to unburden the truth of those 2 weeks, the switch marks, the hunger, the fear, but his happiness stopped me. He'd found light after Mama's death, and I couldn't bear to snuff it out. Instead, I watched Gertrude, testing the humanity I'd glimpsed. I left small offerings, a sprig of mint on her pillow, I hummed him at breakfast, hoping to keep her soft, to remind her of Clara without saying the name. Sometimes it worked, she'd pause, her face distant, and let Peter eat an extra biscuit. Other times, she'd snap, her voice sharp as a whip, and I'd whistle softly, signaling Peter to slip away. One muggy afternoon in March 1954, 6 months after the fever, I was weeding the garden behind the house, the soil warm under my fingers. The secret patch I'd planted for Peter, lettuce, radishes, had grown lush, hidden by the woodshed's shadow. I was pulling a carrot when Gertrude appeared, her shadow falling over me. My heart lurched, expecting anger, but she knelt beside the garden, her apron brushing the dirt. "These lettuce seedlings are wrong," she said, her voice calm. "Too much sun here." I froze, stunned. "You knew about this?" I asked, my voice cautious. She gave a half-smile, almost sad. "I know many things, Cecilia. Always have." She rose, wiping her hands, and looked at the garden with an expression I couldn't read. "Radishes would do well next to the carrots. Good soil." She walked away, leaving me kneeling, my pulse racing. It wasn't kindness, not exactly, but it was something, a gesture, an acknowledgement. For the first time, I wondered if she saw me not as a rival, but as a girl fighting for her brother, just as she'd fought for Clara. That evening, as I set the table, I overheard her on the porch, her voice low, strained. "A letter came," she said to Daddy, who sat whittling. "From Frank." My ears pricked, and I edged closer, hidden by the doorway. "Clara's gone," she continued, her voice flat, like a stone dropped in a well. "Meningitis. 3 months ago." She was Peter's age. Daddy's knife paused, his face softening. "I'm sorry, Gertrude," he said, reaching for her hand. She pulled away, staring at the darkening fields. "It's done," she said, and went inside, her steps heavy. Later, as I washed dishes, she stopped me, her eyes red but dry. "You heard," she said, not a question. I nodded, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry, ma'am," I murmured, and meant it, the weight of her loss a mirror to my own. She studied me, then turned away, but not before saying, "You're stronger than I was at your age." It was the closest she'd come to respect, and it unsettled me, blurring the line between enemy and human. The months that followed were a tense coexistence. Gertrude's cruelty didn't return, but her control remained, her rules strict, her temper a low simmer. She'd tell stories of Clara at night, her voice soft after a glass of whiskey, as if speaking kept her daughter alive. I listened, not out of warmth, but to understand the woman who'd shaped our pain. Peter thrived at school, his laughter brighter, though he still checked over his shoulder, as if Gertrude might appear. I kept the protection system alive, subtle now, extra food hidden, whistles when her mood darkened, but its necessity waned, replaced by a cautious hope. In 1956, at 19, I met Sophie again, now a teacher running the town's primary school. She urged me to take the exam for normal school, to become a teacher. "You've got a gift, Cecilia," she said, her eyes warm. "Use it." I hesitated, fearing Gertrude's reaction, but when I told her, she surprised me. "You've a sharp mind," she said, her voice neutral. "It'd be a waste not to use it." I passed the exam, moving to the city to study, leaving Peter with Daddy and a Gertrude who, while not kind, was no longer a storm. As I packed, I found the photograph I'd seen years ago, Gertrude, Frank, and Clara, tucked in my drawer, left there, I realized, by her. I kept it, not sure why, a reminder of the woman who'd broken us and, in her own fractured way, helped save us. The night of the fever had been a turning point, not just for Peter's survival, but for the slow shift in our story. Gertrude's pain didn't excuse her, but it explained her, and that knowledge became my shield, my way to navigate the world without carrying her hate. Leaving Pineville, I stood on the train platform, the same one where Daddy had brought Gertrude into our lives. Peter hugged me, his eyes bright with pride. "You'll come back, right, Cece?" he asked. "Always," I promised, ruffling his curls. As the train pulled away, I looked at the fields, the oaks, the town that had shaped me, and felt a spark of purpose. The scars on my hands, my heart, were part of me, but they weren't all of me. I was more, light, strength, a girl who'd protected her brother and would keep protecting others, wherever the tracks led. The Pineville of my memory fades into the rhythm of the train's wheels, the clatter and sway carrying me from the red dirt roads and live oaks to a new chapter. It was 1956, and at 19, I was leaving for normal school in Atlanta, my suitcase packed with Mama's recipe book, a few dresses, and the weight of the past. The cotton fields blurred outside the window, their white tufts a stark contrast to the city's promise of brick and bustle. I was no longer the 16-year-old girl who'd built a protection system to shield Peter from Gertrude's cruelty, but her scars, on my hands, in my heart, rode with me, silent companions shaping the woman I was becoming. The air smelled of coal smoke and possibility, yet I couldn't shake the ache of leaving Peter, Daddy, and the town that had both broken and forged me. Atlanta was a shock, its streets alive with cars, voices, and the hum of progress. The normal school was a red brick building with tall windows, filled with young women like me, their eyes bright with dreams. I felt out of place at first, my rural accent thick, my hands calloused from years of labor. But Sophie's encouragement echoed in my mind, "You've got a gift, Cecilia," and I threw myself into study, learning to teach reading, math, history. At night, in my small boarding house room, I'd write letters to Peter, telling him of the city's wonders, urging him to keep up his studies. His replies, scrawled in a boy's careful hand, were my anchor, each word proof he was safe, growing, healing. Back in Pineville, life settled into a cautious rhythm. Daddy's presence kept Gertrude's temper in check, and Peter thrived at school, his teachers praising his knack for numbers. Gertrude remained a complex figure, never warm, but no longer vicious. She'd taken to gardening, tending the patch I'd started behind the woodshed, her hands gentle with the radishes and carrots she'd once criticized. Daddy wrote that she spoke of Clara often, her stories a ritual to keep her daughter's memory alive. I read his letters with a mix of relief and unease, the photograph of Gertrude, Frank, and Clara still tucked in my drawer, a reminder of the pain that had fueled her cruelty. In 1960, I graduated, a teacher's certificate in hand, and returned to Pineville to lead the town's literacy class. The church basement became my classroom, its walls lined with donated books, its desks filled with adults and children hungry to read. Peter, now 14, was my star pupil, his eyes bright with dreams of medicine. He'd grown tall, his curls tamed, but he still hugged me fiercely, whispering, "You saved me, Cece." I'd smile, hiding the ache of those memories, the switch marks, the fever, the protection system that had been our lifeline. Gertrude watched from a distance, her presence at church polite but reserved, her eyes meeting mine with a nod, never warmth. Life moved forward, each year a step away from 1953. Daddy's health began to falter, his heart weakened by years on the railroad, but his laughter remained, a gift I cherished. Gertrude cared for him with a diligence that surprised me, her hand steady as she measured his medicine. When he died in 1968, a sudden heart attack stealing him in the night, the town mourned, their voices a chorus of love for the man who'd played his accordion under the stars. At the wake, I found Gertrude on the porch, alone, her face etched with a loneliness I recognized. "What now?" I asked, not expecting an answer. "Boston," she said, her voice hollow. "I've a sister there." Before she left, she handed me a package wrapped in brown paper. "So you don't forget," she said, her eyes unreadable. I opened it weeks later, alone in my room, and found her diary, its pages filled with new entries. The last one stopped me cold. When Joseph brought me to this house, I saw in Peter the son I never had, and in Cecilia the rival who could steal my new husband's love. I turned my pain into poison, nearly destroying 2 innocent children. I don't deserve forgiveness, but perhaps one day they'll see the monster wasn't me, it was the pain wearing my skin. I closed the diary, tears falling, not for her but for the truth it held. Her actions were unforgivable, yet her confession was a mirror to my own scars, a reminder that pain could twist anyone into something they weren't. Gertrude died in 1975, in a Boston nursing home, the news reaching me through a cousin's letter. I felt no sadness, no relief, just a quiet closing of a chapter that had shaped me. That same year, I founded Pineville's first shelter for abused children, using the money from selling Mama and Daddy's house. Sophie, now a state school director, was my partner, her faith and fire matching my own. Peter, a pediatrician by then, drove from the capital monthly to offer free care, his gentle hands a testament to the boy who'd survived Gertrude's cruelty. The shelter was a simple building, its walls painted bright, its rooms filled with books and toys. Each child who entered carried a story, bruises from a parent's anger, hunger from neglect, fear from betrayal. I'd sit with them, listening, teaching them to read or draw, showing them they were seen, valued. In their eyes, I saw Peter at 7, trembling in the shed, and myself at 16, building a system to protect him. Every laugh, every small victory, was a defiance of the past, a proof that scars could become strength. One evening, as I locked the shelter's doors, a young reporter asked, "What drives you, Mrs. Cecilia? Why this work?" I looked at my hands, the calluses faded but the memory sharp, and smiled. "Because the worst scars are the ones no one sees," I said. "And because even the most broken can be mended with patience and love." The words were my truth, forged in those 2 weeks of 1953, when I learned to protect, to endure, to find light in the darkest places. As I walked home, the Pineville stars glittered above, brighter than ever, and I thought of Mama, her songs, her prayers. "Lord, make me a light," I whispered, and felt her with me, guiding me still. The shelter was my purpose, my way to transform pain into hope, to ensure no child faced what Peter and I had. Gertrude's diary rested in my drawer, not as forgiveness, but as understanding, a reminder that even monsters were human, and that healing came not from erasing scars, but from building something beautiful with them. The Pineville of today, in 2025, is a different place from the town of my youth, its red dirt roads now paved, its cotton fields dotted with new homes. The live oaks still stand, their moss swaying in the breeze, whispering memories of 1953, when I was 16 and fighting to protect my brother Peter from Gertrude's cruelty. At 88, I sit in my small house, the walls lined with photos, Peter as a doctor, my children and grandchildren, the shelter I built. My hands, scarred from those years of labor, tremble now, but they hold a story I've carried for 7 decades. It's a story of pain, yes, but also of resilience, faith, and the purpose I found in turning scars into stars. As I share it, I see the faces of those I've helped, the children whose lives I've touched, and I know it's worth telling. The shelter I founded in 1975 grew over the years, its bright walls a beacon for children lost to abuse or neglect. Each one who walked through its doors carried a weight I recognized, fear in their eyes, trust bruised by betrayal. I'd sit with them, teaching them to read or bake cornbread, listening to their stories, showing them they were not alone. In their small hands clutching pencils, in their hesitant smiles, I saw Peter at 7, trembling in the shed, and myself, building a protection system to shield him. Every child was a chance to rewrite our story, to prove that love could mend what cruelty had broken. Peter, now a grandfather, visits often, his laughter warm as he plays with his teenage grandkids. We sit on my porch, the same one where Daddy played his accordion, and talk of those days, not with the raw pain of youth, but with the clarity time brings. "You saved my life twice," he says, his eyes soft. "Once during the fever, and every day you kept her from breaking me." I shake my head, smiling. We saved each other, Peter. He became a pediatrician, his gentle hands healing countless children, a legacy born from the boy who learned to trust again under my care. Sophie, my rock through it all, passed in 1990, but her spirit lives in the shelter's mission, her faith in community woven into every program we built. The protection system I created in 1953, whistles, hidden food, distractions, became a methodology I taught to educators across Georgia. It's a system to spot abuse, to intervene gently, to rebuild a child's heart without causing more harm. I trained dozens, then hundreds, sharing strategies born from desperation, now tools for hope. Each workshop, each teacher I mentored, felt like a victory over Gertrude's shadow, a way to ensure no child endured what we did. Gertrude's memory lingered, complex and heavy. Her diary, with its confession of pain turned to poison, stayed in my drawer, read only once more after her death. It took decades to make peace with her, not to forgive, but to understand. She was a woman shattered by loss, her cruelty a warped reflection of her grief for Clara. I saw her and the parents at the shelter, broken by their own traumas, lashing out until we helped them heal. Understanding didn't erase the welts on Peter's back or the fear in my heart, but it freed me from carrying her hate. I chose to see her as human, flawed and hurting, and that choice let me build a life of purpose. By 1980, I was married to Thomas, a kind man who taught history at the high school. Our 2 children, Maria and James, grew up hearing stories of their grandmother's songs and their uncle's courage, but I spared them the darkest parts until they were older. When I told Maria, at 20, about Gertrude, she hugged me, tears in her eyes. "How did you keep going, Mama?" she asked. I touched the scars on my hands, faded but ever present. "Faith," I said. "And love for Peter. They were my light in the dark." Maria now runs the shelter, her strength a mirror to mine, carrying the mission forward. The stars over Pineville still shine as bright as they did in 1953, each one a reminder of Mama's promise that she'd watch over us. I feel her in the quiet moments, her prayers, Lord, make me a light woven into my life's work. The shelter has helped thousands, its impact rippling beyond our small town. Children who once cowered now thrive, doctors, teachers, parents, their scars transformed into strength, just as mine were. I see them at reunions, their hugs warm, their stories proof that healing is possible. At 88, my body is slower, but my heart is full. I speak at schools, churches, sharing this story, not to dwell on pain, but to show that even the deepest wounds can birth purpose. The reporter's question from 1975 echoes, why this work? Because I learned that invisible scars cut deepest, and that love, patience, and community can mend them. Because I was Peter's light, and now I'm a light for others, guiding them through their own dark nights. As I finish this tale, I think of you, wherever you are, perhaps carrying your own scars. Know this, you are not alone. Healing comes in sharing, in transforming pain into something greater. The night of the fever, when Gertrude's humanity broke through, taught me that even in darkness, small lights can shine. That lesson carried me through decades, from a frightened girl to a woman who built a legacy of hope. I close my eyes, the Pineville breeze soft on my face, and hear Mama's guitar, her voice singing Amazing Grace. Peter's laughter joins it, young and free, from a time before Gertrude. The scars we carry don't define us, they shape us, but only if we choose to let them. Mine led me to a shelter, to children saved, to a life of meaning. Yours can lead you somewhere beautiful too, if you dare to walk toward the light. Thank you for hearing my story, for letting these memories touch your heart. If they resonate, share them with someone who needs hope. The dawn always comes, no matter how dark the night. And in that dawn, we find not just survival, but purpose, a chance to turn our scars into stars, guiding others home.